in the diversity of living world. Now the second chapter is biological classification. So here, since civilization, many people had tried to classify the living organisms. Basically, we know that the plants and animals are present, but many based on their need, but it is not a systematic or a scientific pattern that have been followed, but for their need or for their purposes, they started classifying the plants and animals or living organisms into various groups. But out of all of them, starting from civilization, so out of all of them, here Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, had given the first scientific pattern of classification of the living organisms. So here, what is the criteria that have been considered by Aristotle for classification of the living organisms is simple morphological characteristic features. So this is a criteria that have been considered by Aristotle for the classification of the living organisms. He classified the plants into three groups. One is herbs, second group is shrubs, and the third group is trees. Here, as we know, the basic difference between these three groups of plants. So likewise, based on the morphological characters, he categorized the plants into three groups. In the same way, he classified the animals also. He classified animals into two groups. One is anima and other one is enema. Here, anima includes the animals which contain red blood in them, or red blood cells are present, whereas enema includes non-red blooded animals. So that is a basic criteria that have been considered by this scientist. So we can consider this is a first scientific classification, but it is not a perfect classification, because when we consider the plants, so all herbs based on their morphology have been kept in one group, but the herbs may show lot of variations also. In the same way, all shrubs may not show all the similarities. In the same way, the trees may not show all the similarities. But based on only one criteria or based on only one character he had classified, but because of this one, many plants which are having lot number of differences, they have been grouped or kept in one single group. The same thing in the classification of animals also. So that is the reason why it is not an acceptable system of classification. After Aristotle, Swedish naturalist Linnaeus had given one other classification. His classification is called as two kingdom classification. Two kingdom classification. So here all the living organisms have been divided into two kingdoms. The first kingdom is Plantae and other kingdom is Animalia. So here basically we know that plants and animals are differing in some characteristic features. Particularly we can say based on the nature of this character, that is the all living organisms which contain cell wall are kept under Plantae, and all living organisms which are not having cell wall are kept under Animalia. That is, only character that is presence and absence of cell wall is a criteria that have been followed by this scientist. But there are some living organisms like bacteria and some others are there which are not given some particular position in his classification, because bacteria is the one which is having cell wall, but there is no particular position that have been shown for that organisms in the Linnaeus system of classification. But despite of that character also, many scientists or this type of classification was followed, that is the Linnaeus classification was followed by many people till recent years also. But whatever the classification that is given by this scientist is inadequate, because as the time have been going on, so many characteristic features have been identified and they have been able to differentiate the plants which have been kept under Plantae and the animals which have been kept under Animalia. That is the reason why there is a need of further classification of the living organisms. In Linnaeus system of classification, there are many limitations, like he haven't differentiated unicellular organisms from that of multicellular organisms. That is, if we take the plant kingdom, so in the plant kingdom we know that there are some unicellular organisms such as Chlamydomonas, which is an unicellular organism. So this unicellular organism is kept along with the multicellular organism like Spirogyra. So despite of this difference in their cellular organization, both of them have been kept under one group. That is the way how he haven't differentiated the unicellular organisms from the multicellular organisms. And second one is he haven't differentiated the photosynthetic organisms from that of non-photosynthetic organisms. That is, let us take algae group. Almost all the algae group are autotrophic in their nature. Autotrophic means which can prepare their own food materials by a process called as photosynthesis. But whereas fungi, other group of plants are there which are heterotrophic in their nature. Heterotrophic means they can't prepare their own food materials. Either they may survive in the form of parasites or in the form of saprophytes. So despite of this difference also, they have been kept under the same group, that is Plantae. Then in Linnaeus classification, one more limitation is he haven't differentiated the prokaryotic organisms from that of eukaryotic organisms. That is, plant kingdom includes both prokaryotes and also eukaryotes. In the same way, the Animalia kingdom also includes both the prokaryotes and also the eukaryotes. Likewise, there are such limitations in the Linnaeus classification which are not being satisfied and not given a suitable answer, or justification was not given for such type of limitations. So that is the way how this lot number of objections are there in the classification that was given by Linnaeus, that is two kingdom classification. So because of all these things, the scientists had tried to give some other new type of classification which may be adequate and satisfy and justify the objections that have been given by other group of scientists. The only characteristic feature that have been considered by Linnaeus is the presence of cell wall in the animals. But here, what is the actual nature of cell wall, or we can say the composition of the cell wall? We know that plants have the cell wall which is mostly cellulosic in its nature. But there are some plants, that is fungi. Fungi have cell wall, but this cell wall is non-cellulosic in its nature. In place of this cellulosic cell wall, they have chitin, a nitrogen containing polysaccharide in the cell wall. So here that is the way how this nature of or composition of the cell wall of all the plants is not same. Despite of this difference also, the fungi have been kept along with the other groups, like so the one which are having the cellulosic cell wall are the group called as algae, Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, Gymnosperms, and angiosperms. All these are the group of plants which have the cell wall in the form of cellulose. But fungi is the only group which contains chitin. Despite of this difference also, the fungi have been kept along with the other group of plants which have the cellulosic cell wall, and all of them have been grouped into one kingdom called as Plantae. This is also one of the limitations related to the classification that was given by Linnaeus scientist. So likewise, he had considered only some few number of characters. So that is the reason why this classification was inadequate, and here not only the gross morphology they had considered for the classification, but apart from this one, to get an more suitable classification, the scientists should consider some other criteria. So that criteria includes, one is cell structure, second one nature of wall, that is nature of the cell wall, third one is habitat, the place of survival of the plants or the living organisms, the fourth one is mode of nutrition, that is whether they are autotrophic or heterotrophic. In that autotrophic also whether they are photoautotrophic, chemoautotrophic, that have to be considered, and if they are heterotrophic, whether they are parasitic, symbiotic or saprophytic, that have to be considered. And the method of reproduction, which method of reproduction is done by those living organisms for the perpetuation of the progeny. Then evolutionary relationship or the evolutionary changes which are taking place in the course of progression of the species. So apart from the gross morphology, so the other criteria have to be followed to get a more and more accurate classification. When this type of criteria have been considered, so we can expect to have an adequate system of classification, so that whatever the doubts or whatever the injustice that have been done for different groups of organisms, that can be justified. So based on these criteria, we can clearly deviate one group from the other group, or segregate one group of plants or one group of living organisms from the other group, and they have been given a special place or a special group. So that is the way how this classification have to be done to get a more and more accurate and adequate system of classification. Next one is the classification which was given by Haeckel scientist. This scientist had given three kingdom classification. According to this Haeckel's three kingdom classification, there are three kingdoms are there. One is Plantae, second one is Animalia, and third one is Protista. So here Plantae includes all plants which are multicellular in its nature, and Animalia includes all multicellular animals. Whereas the Protista, according to the scientist, it includes the unicellular plants and unicellular animals, irrespective of whether they are prokaryotic or eukaryotic. That means once again here in the Protista, it includes both some prokaryotic organisms and some eukaryotic organisms. So that's what here it is not giving the perfect classification. So that here also there is an injustice for the categorization of the eukaryotic and the prokaryotic unicellular organisms. So likewise here, if we take the prokaryotes, we know that bacteria is a one group which is a prokaryote, and he kept the eukaryotes like slime molds, algae, such type of group of organisms. So here that's what the difference we can be. And of course, apart from that one, the nature of the cell wall in bacteria and the algae are different. So likewise, a lot of clarity was missing in the classification that was given by Haeckel scientist also.